We're going to go ahead and get started. Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome to an absolute beginner's guide to the Superior Hiking Trail, a webinar with experiential educator and SHT volunteer Anna Swarts. My name is Jaron Cramer, and I'm the Development and Communications Director for the Superior Hiking Trail Association. We are the nonprofit that protects, renews, and enhances the Superior Hiking Trail. We're so excited to host this webinar today to help those of you who are newly interested in the trail learn some basics and very important first steps for planning and enjoying your trips on the SHT. Thank you to everybody for tuning in today, and a special thanks to everyone who pitched in a donation at registration. If you're not already a member or haven't made a gift to the Superior Hiking Trail Association, please consider visiting our website at superiorhiking.org to join or to give. We just launched our new member starter kit promotion in our online trail store, which is another great way to give back and receive a copy of our comprehensive trail atlas for the SHT, our guidebook for the Superior Hiking Trail, and the Superior Hiking Trail data book, or some other combination of these products. They're super helpful trail information resources. And of course, support from trail users like you is what powers our work to care for the Superior Hiking Trail and continue to provide helpful trail information resources like this event. Before we jump into Anna's presentation, I just want to let you know what to expect as we go through today's webinar and share a couple quick thoughts. Of course, we wish we were able to gather with you in person. Nonetheless, we're glad to be able to connect with you virtually to talk about the trail from the safety of our homes. We're planning to offer more events like this on topics related to the SHT in the future. So be sure to follow us on social media or sign up for our monthly Trail Mix e-newsletter to stay informed on future events and so much more. Of course, we expect today's webinar to go smoothly, but please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. We're also recording this webinar session, and we'll share it afterwards on the Superior Hiking Trail Association's YouTube channel, just in case you miss anything and want to watch again. That recording will also feature captions for those who may be hard of hearing. After Anna's presentation, we'll answer a few questions from those of you tuning in live and from a few folks who sent in their questions in advance. We're going to try and bring folks into the video stream to ask your questions live to Anna or I, and I'll explain how to do that when we get there. You are welcome at any time to ask questions by using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them. For those of you who may be new to the Superior Hiking Trail, I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that our trail is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe people. I also want to share a bit about our association and why we are so passionate about what we do. Put simply, we protect the Superior Hiking Trail to foster growth and connections to nature as individuals and to each other. At the association, we've been engaged in improving, protecting, enhancing, and promoting the Superior Hiking Trail for more than 35 years. Our small but mighty staff and our board of directors and our volunteers, we all work to improve the experience on the trail and strive to connect the aspirations of those who use the trail with those who care for the land around it. We are leading this charge by harnessing the power of our volunteers, our supporters, our agency partners, and trail users like you to break down barriers, engage participants, and create deeper relationships between people and nature. We do all of this for many reasons, but most importantly, to protect these natural landscapes and preserve them and the trail so it can be enjoyed for generations to come. Our association is honored to serve as the stewards and promoters of this North Shore treasure, and we're excited to welcome all of you into our trail community. Without further ado, this brings me to today's event. I am so excited to introduce Anna Swarts to share some basics on planning and enjoying a trip on the trail. I'll let Anna share a little bit more about her background, but I will say you're in for a treat today. Anna is an experienced user of the Superior Hiking Trail and other long-distance trails around the country, and she's joined us on the trail as a volunteer to dig latrines, clear overgrown sections, and much more. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Anna.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Jaron. Just a little bit about me so you know who I am. I am Anna. I use she and her pronouns. First off, I want to thank Jaron and I thank all of you for tuning in. I started my adventures with the Superior Hiking Trail probably back in about 2005 when I was able to come on a trip on it with a local nonprofit called the Red Wing ELC from my hometown. Then I kind of went off to college and did some things, and I came back to the trail in 2012 when I did my first solo backpacking trip. I had such a good time on this that I decided to come back the next year and do a through hike up the trail. So during that time, I really was able to connect well with myself and with the trail itself, with nature, and with a lot of other really wonderful people. So it's great to hear that Jaron says that that's kind of the goal of the SHTA. Since then, I have really enjoyed volunteering with the SHTA to do what Jaron said, to dig latrines, to work on trail work, to write blog posts, to do all sorts of things. And now I get to be on this side of a webinar, so this is a first for me. So I'll get queued up here with my presentation. But like Jaron said, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat and I'll either answer them as we go or we can answer them at the end. So I'll get this queued up. Okay. All right. So first off, if you haven't been to the trail yet, and if you haven't had the chance to come up to it, we're kind of want to know where it is and what it is, right? So the Superior Hiking Trail runs from the Wisconsin border up to close to Canada. So it's over 300 miles. There's a bunch of backcountry campsites. There's a lot of different trailheads. And so you can really use it to enjoy however you want. You can do a long trip, you can do a short trip. There's lots of different options for you there. If you are driving up from the cities, it's going to take you a little bit more than 2 hours of a drive. If you're coming up all the way to the northern terminus, it's going to be about 5 hours from there. If you're in Duluth or somewhere else in Minnesota, it might be a little bit more or a little bit less. When you're looking to get to the trail, you have some different options of how to get there. So on the SHTA website, there's a lot of really good resources. There's also the guidebook, like Jaron was mentioning. You can look at the trail atlas maps. Once you're up, like along 61, you're going to be seeing signs that look kind of like the emblem of the Spear Hiking Trail that can point you to some of the different trailheads. And actually, Google Maps and some other things have them listed on them now too. So finding the trailheads has gotten a little bit easier in the last couple of years. Now, if you are interested in doing a one-way hike on the trail, there is a variety of different resources that you can use, such as shuttles, rideshare services, taxis in some areas, like near the Duluth section. And if you are in Duluth, you might be able to use even city buses to get to some of the trailheads. There are a lot of different places that you can park if you are able to drive to the trail. Now, I got this map from the Superior Hiking Trail website, and on it, you can see a lot of the different parking areas marked with the P. So this is the Duluth section, so there's a lot of different spots that you can go. Some of them you can park overnight, some of them you can't. So you can see that information on the website and also in the guidebook. The trail also travels through state parks where you can park your car overnight a lot of the time if you have a state park sticker. So that's something that you can check out too. Now this year especially, it was really busy in some areas of the trail. So what I found worked really well is to try out alternative trailheads. So I might have had a trailhead in mind and saw that it was really busy when I went to go to it. And you might try one that's just a little bit north or a little bit south and find no one. So I would recommend if you are going to be out and you have the flexibility of being able to drive to a different trailhead, you can try out a different one and find some new beautiful spots. There's lots of questions about whether or not it's safe to park at some of these different trailheads overnight. And in general, things are pretty safe. But just like with anywhere, you want to make sure that you're not going to leave valuables in your vehicle, and especially don't leave them visible. So that's kind of just a general rule for all of the trailheads, but that'll help keep your stuff more safe. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can enjoy the trail. I personally like to do all of these different things. So if you just have an hour or two, you can easily just get out for a day hike or a snowshoe. If you have a couple weeks, you can do a long distance hike, like a through hike. But what is neat with it is that there's lots of different campsites, there's lots of different trailheads, so you can really make it work for you. There was a question that was asking about if there's any group hikes that are happening this year. And as far as the SHTA goes, there's not any that are planned because of COVID, but there are some other opportunities that you might be able to take part in. And we can talk about that in the questions and answers a little bit too. All right, so once you've gotten to the trail, then you have to find your way on the trail. The SHTA and volunteers have helped to make this a lot easier by putting blazes or those blue marks on a lot of trees, as well as having the Superior Hiking Trail plaques on trees, as well as some road crossings and things like that. So those will help guide you to know whether you're on the SHT or not. If it's a spur trail or like a trail that just connects the SHT to a parking area or to something else that's interesting, it'll be a white blaze. So you'll always know that you're on the SHT if you see the little plaques that say Superior Hiking Trail, or if you see the blue marks on the trees. Now, when you're out there, it's helpful to kind of know what's ahead and what you can expect. So using a guidebook or a map and compass can really help you to kind of know what to expect up there, whether you're going to have a long hike or a short hike. There's also apps and GPS things that you can use. So the Avenza map app has, you can buy some maps through the Superior Hiking Trail Association that you can download offline and use. And that can be really cool too. Of course, if you're using anything that requires batteries, you want to remember that. So bring extra batteries if you're going to be relying on that. I personally love maps and compasses, so that's usually what I kind of go for. But if you don't feel comfortable using that, you might want to seek out classes on how to do that, either from your local community ed or through like places like REI or Midwest Mountaineering. And there's some really good YouTube videos out there too on how to use a map and compass. So again, when you're going out there, like staying on the trail is usually pretty easy because there's a lot of blue blazes out there, but it can be really nice to have some other resources with you in case you're not so sure. Now, if you have been looking around at any of the online forums or anything like that, you might have seen the abbreviation LNT listed, and you might be wondering kind of like what that even means. So LNT means leave no trace. And it's kind of this idea that we want to enjoy the trail, but we want to help make sure that it stays in good condition for other people too. So I'm going to talk about a lot of ways that we can do this kind of in practice on the SHT as I go through the rest of this presentation. All right. So one question is, how far do we want to go? You know, I've said that you can kind of choose how far you want to go, but how far is that, right? So it really depends on whether you are hiking, whether you're snowshoeing, or whether you're trying to backpack. And it also depends a lot on what you do in your normal life. So if you're really, really active in your normal life, you might be able to cover more miles. If you aren't as active in your regular life, you might want to plan on covering less miles. What's great is that there's a lot of really beautiful miles on the SHT. The average backpacker is usually going to be covering less than 10 miles, and it's generally better to err on the side of having shorter days if you're planning a backpacking trip than try and bite off more than you can chew. So even if you just plan to hike in a mile or two and test it out, that's perfectly okay on the Superior Hiking Trail. Something that you could consider is that a lot of backpackers will average between 1 and 2 miles per hour. So you could use that to kind of determine how long you can go. So if you wanted to hike for 4 hours, that might mean that you could travel like 4 to 8 miles during that time. And you also might want to consider the weather and conditions you might meet on the trail. So if you're snowshoeing and there's a bunch of snow, it's going to be a lot more work to cover 1 mile than if it's like the middle of the fall and just beautiful dry conditions. So that can be something that you can consider as you're planning your trips too. If you haven't been out on the trail, there is a lot of different conditions that you might find. So all of these pictures are from warmer months, so not winter. But it's a fairly rugged trail. There is a lot of places that are roots and rocky. There are other areas that are a lot smoother. There's some areas that have boardwalk, some bridges, and some areas that you might have to rock hop over little streams. The picture kind of in the lower middle that shows a lot of mud is not usually what you're going to find on a lot of the trail, but it does kind of draw into sharp relief that you want to avoid the trail when it is really wet and muddy. So like early spring is a good time to just let the trail dry out, maybe practice hiking in other areas before you come onto the trail itself. And you might find down trees on occasion, and you can submit trail reports when you get back to kind of let the SHTA know that a tree has fallen down. They and volunteers work hard to maintain the trail, so it's helpful if you can kind of let them know things that you're seeing while you're out there. All right, so if you haven't ever been out on the trail, it can be good to kind of work to prepare yourself for it. So if you have access to trails near where you live, you can get out there and hike on those to help prepare yourself. It's a good idea if you're going to be backpacking to put a bunch of stuff in your backpack. I sometimes will put like canned goods and like random books and stuff to make my backpack heavier, as heavy as about I think it'll be on my trip, and then just walk around my local area. Doing this will help you kind of feel what it feels like to have that weight on your back. And it also gives you a chance to test out your footwear and your clothing, so you can know whether it's going to give you some, if you're going to get chafing in any weird spots or anything like that. It's also a good idea to try out your gear before you get out there. So you might consider setting up a tent before you go, or you might consider trying out your stove before you go. This way, if you need an extra piece or you need some stakes or something like that, you find that out before you're out there on the trail and before it might be raining or something when you don't want to be figuring out that stuff. I know I mentioned maps earlier, but it's a good idea to look at them before you go and make sure you feel comfortable reading them so you can ask questions and find some of those other resources before you're out on the trail. And finally, you want to make sure that you leave details of where you're going and when you plan to come back with somebody that you trust before you go. So that's a good idea, whether it's just for a day trip or whether that's for like an overnight trip. This way, if you don't come back when you're supposed to, they'll know where to send people to go looking for you. All right, I saw that there was a lot of questions about what to bring in the list. And so we can cover more specifics of this kind of in the questions and answers side of things. But when you are considering what to bring, you want to consider that you have to carry all of it, right? And if you have a really heavy pack, not only are you going to be more tired, but you're also going to have a better chance of getting injured. So if you just make sure that you have the 10 essentials, and I grabbed these from REI's website here, but if you're making sure that you have your clothes, your water, your food, your maps or other sort of navigation, a headlamp, some sort of sun protection, whether that's in the summer or the winter, your first aid, knife, a fire, shelter of some sort. Like if you have those things, you're going to be doing pretty well, whether that is going to be for a day trip or an overnight trip. And we can go into a little bit more of the specifics on some of those in the question and answer stuff. I put that your feet are really important because they are, right? They're what are getting you from point A to point B. And there's a lot of different stuff out there about whether trail running shoes are better or whether like hiking boots are better. And I have worn both. And really my answer for that is whatever is not going to make your feet have blisters. So if you are wearing a shoe that fits you well and that you feel good walking in, that is probably going to be the best shoe for you. So that'll change from person to person. Now, when you're thinking about the different options that you have for gear, you might be looking at it and say like, I don't even know if I like backpacking. Like, I don't want to buy all this stuff. And that's where renting might come in really handy. So some universities and places like REI have the option of renting gear before you buy it. So you can really try out some different gear and see what works for you before you make that investment monetarily. There's also a lot more opportunities to have used gear. So there's some different consignment shops that you can check on for that. And I think I included resources that you'll get in a follow-up email later with some of that. So that can be a really good option too, because used gear, you can get good stuff for a lot cheaper. Now, there was a lot of questions about camping. And if you are doing an overnight trip, you're going to get to sleep out there, right? One of the questions that was out there is like, can I reserve campsites or do I have to pay, or like, how does that all work? And if you look at the map that I have shared right here, the little black triangles are the backcountry campsites, the backpacking ones that are part of the SHTA. And those are no, like you don't have to pay for those, you cannot reserve them. The little triangles that have the C's in them, those are campgrounds. So those would be places that you would pay for and you could potentially reserve depending on the campground. If you are like, well, wait, I can't reserve a campsite. Like, what is going to happen if there's people at the campsite that I want to camp at? And that's where sharing campsites comes in. So the picture that I have in the middle here is kind of a little bit of a regular campsite. They are going to have some flat areas. They're going to have a fire ring. They're going to have a latrine. And if somebody is also camped there, then you just kind of nestle your tent in there and camp with them. And I have had so many really cool interactions with people that I wouldn't necessarily see in my regular life, camping at Superior Hiking Trail campsites. So I know sometimes people can be kind of anxious about sharing with strangers, but I have always had really positive or at least neutral experiences with it. So you don't need to be worried about that necessarily. A question that I see a lot is that the trail crosses over public land, so can't we just camp wherever on the public land? And this kind of brings us back to our leave no trace principle 2, where we want to travel and camp on durable surfaces. So because there's so many people that are coming through the Superior Hiking Trail, we want to make sure that we are keeping our impact to a minimum. So if we stay at the campsites, then that helps to keep from impacting some of the other areas of the trail. So that's one part. There is a lot of public land, but it also is interspersed with private land. And so if you are staying at campsites, you know that you're not accidentally trespassing on somebody's private land. So we want to make sure that we maintain those relationships with those private landowners that let us walk past and through their land. Because when we don't, then we end up having to close sections of trails and reroute them. So yes, we want to make sure we're staying at campsites. We want to make sure that we are not trying to make them bigger by cutting down anything live. We just want to, make sure that we're sharing them with other people the best we can. Now, another question is, can I camp at a trailhead? So I'm driving up late at night, like I won't get there until it's dark. Can I stay at a trailhead? And that's another no, because some of the trailheads are on private land also, and they aren't going to have latrines and bathrooms and things. So we want to make sure that we are minimizing our impact there. Now, before I lived in Duluth, this would be me sometimes where I would be driving up and it would be like fairly late by the time I would get up here. And what I would do is I would get a campsite at one of the campgrounds. And that was really nice because then I could just drive up to my spot, stay there, and then get started on the trail the next morning. And the last question on here is about campfires. And a lot of people really love to have campfires, and you definitely can. There is a campfire ring at all of the different campsites. But you do want to make sure that if you do have a campfire, that you are getting sticks to burn and bark to burn that's already on the ground and dry. And that whenever you're done with your campfire, you want to make sure that you put it out, completely out with water so that we don't start any forest fires. All right, another question that was out there, and we can cover more in detail later if we want to too, but it's can I drink the water, right? So we are so fortunate in Minnesota to have so much good water, but we do want to make sure that we're treating it, because even though it's really pretty clean, there still could be things like Giardia in it, which will make you really sick. So some of the options that you have for that are like filters, chemicals like iodine or aquamira or like bleach, UV lights and boiling. So there's lots of different ways that you can make the water safe to drink. And some people like some ways better than others. So that's kind of a personal choice with that too. You might notice like in my picture here that the water's kind of brown. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily dirty. There's just tannins in the water that make it kind of like a brownish color. But personally, I don't think it makes it taste bad at all. So don't let that kind of scare you off. All right, so what do we eat? Now, when you're out here backpacking or hiking, you're going to be using a lot of energy. So you want to make sure that you are adding to that. You're taking in food. High calorie food like nuts or fruit, like dried fruit, cheese, stuff like that can be really great. because not only is it high calorie, but it's also going to be lighter for how many calories you're going to be able to take in. Now, you don't want to use backpacking necessarily as a way to lose weight because your body is already under a lot of stress, like just because you're hiking and you have a pack on and all of these things. And if you're really hungry, you're probably going to be really tired and then more likely to make bad decisions and get injured. So you want to make sure that you are giving your body what it needs. Now, I know there's some questions that were on the previous list that talked about dehydrating foods. Me personally, I like to dehydrate vegetables. I borrow a friend's dehydrator and I'll dehydrate like a bunch of peppers. But I usually will use more packaged foods of like couscous and macaroni and cheese and stuff for my main like cooked meals. Whatever you decide to eat, it's generally a good idea to repackage it before you get out there, because then you'll be able to both carry more actual food and not have as much trash with you when you're out on the trail. Then there's the choice of whether you want to cook or not cook. So I personally really like to have a hot meal in the evenings. Sometimes if I'm going to have like a slower trip, I'll like to have coffee in the mornings. This is definitely just a personal preference. A lot of people just like to eat cheese and crackers and tortillas and stuff and not even deal with having a stove. So those are all different things that you can kind of think about and see what works for you. Now, the picture on the top left here is my friend Jen, and she is repackaging some food on one of our resupplies out west. So as you can see, we have all sorts of like tortillas and peanut butter and all sorts of stuff like that. And we needed, when we were out west, we had to make it fit in a bear canister, which is not something that you have to do. But this idea that if you repackage it, you can really bring a lot more food in your bag than you can if you just left things in their containers. All right, so then we're up to how much food do I need? And again, this really depends so much on you. So somebody who is like a 15-year-old boy who's an athlete might need more food than like I might need. But in general, people are going to want to bring between 2,500 and 4,500 calories per person per day. So that breaks down roughly to like 1.5 to 2.5 pounds per person. And, you know, as you get out more, you'll learn more like what works for you, what foods you really crave. I find that I really like to bring salty snacks because I find that most of the granola bars and like oatmeals and stuff are pretty sweet. So just kind of figuring out kind of what works for you there is what we have here. All right. Oops. Looks like, there we go. All right, next up, what do we do with trash? All right, so if you bring it in, you want to bring it out with you. That makes it easier, right? So if you're repackaging your food, you're not going to have as much trash with you than if you just brought it in normally. And while you're out there, if you do see trash, you can pick it up. In my experience, the SHT is really pretty clean, but it never hurts to leave it a little bit cleaner for the person behind you. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to burn it or bury it or put it in latrines, because burning is maybe not going to burn it completely. So you'll be left with a lot of different like pieces of trash in the fire rings. And then the volunteers who kind of monitor those campsites are going to have to carry it out for you. So you want to make sure you're not burning it. Not only for that, but we also don't want those toxins to go into the air. Burying it or putting it in latrines kind of sets it up for animals to come check it out. And we really don't want animals digging up trash, especially we don't want animals digging in latrines. So please just make sure you're taking out whatever trash you bring in. And then speaking of latrines, right? Like, where do I go to the bathroom? If I'm going to be out here all day, I want to make sure that I can take care of this bodily function. So at all the campsites, there are latrines. And like Jaron said, there's a bunch of us volunteers who have dug some of them for you. So I get kind of excited, as you can see in my picture here, about the latrines that I dig sometimes. But you know, if you're at campsite and you have to deal with your number two, then there's a hole there ready for you. If you are not at a campsite and you have to deal with that, because sometimes that happens, you're going to be able to dig a hole for yourself. So if you have a trowel or like a small shovel, like these little purple ones I pulled off the SHT website, that can make your life a lot easier. So in general, you'll want your hole that you're going to be pooping in to be like 6 to 8 inches wide and about the same deep. And that way you can make sure that you can really get it covered up so that it won't get disturbed by anybody else. When you're deciding where to go to the bathroom, if you're not at a latrine, you want to make sure that you are away from the trail, and you want to make sure that you are away from water sources so that we can keep that stuff from going into the water. Next up, toilet paper. This is a pretty important one because it's something that I see pretty frequently when I'm out. You want to make sure that you are taking your toilet paper back with you. So it's kind of like a pack it in, pack it out sort of thing. So you're going to want to make sure you're bringing a bag that you can put used toilet paper in so that you don't leave it like strewn about in the woods. Eventually, after a few years, maybe it'll decompose, but until then, it just looks really gross. So thank you so much for packing out your toilet paper too. And finally, if you are a menstruator, you might deal with having your period out while you're on trail. And if that is the case, then you are going to want to pack out those supplies too. So whether they're tampons or pads or whatever. Something that you can consider is something like a menstrual cup, because that can be a way that you can deal with that stuff without having to bring a bunch of extra supplies or anything like that. So yeah, that's how you can take care of bathroom stuff. Next up, can I bring my dog? Yeah, dogs are great. We all, or a lot of us, love dogs. However, if you are going to bring a dog, you want to make sure that they are on a leash and that they're under control and that you're picking up their poop. And we all know that your dog is really friendly and they're probably the best one, but you don't necessarily know that somebody else's dog is friendly, right? So you don't want your friendly dog running up to their unfriendly dog and having some sort of altercation. Another thing you want to consider is that, like with their poop, like sure, animals poop in the woods too, but your dog, because it's not from the forest, it might be bringing different pathogens and different nutrients into the forest too. So you want to make sure that you're kind of picking up their poop. If a day hike, you can use a plastic bag. If it's an overnight, you might want to consider trying to bury it like you would your own. And another thing to think about with dogs too is that there's wildlife, right? So in my experience of hiking on the Superior Hiking Trail, since 2005, I've seen, I think, 3 bears in person, and then I've heard like one that came through camp. So they're not super common, but they are around. So you want to make sure that you are taking precautions to keep yourself, your dogs, and everything else safe from them. And what you can do with that is just make sure that you're storing your food and your waste properly. In the supplemental material, I included a video of how to hang a bear hang. So that's going to be when you're hanging your food from like a tree. And that not only is going to help to keep it safer from the bears, but it's also going to help keep squirrels and chipmunks and stuff out of it too. You're going to want to keep a clean camp. So if you're making food, you might want to make sure that you pick up any pieces that are falling on the ground. If you're thinking about things that you're bringing, like smelly stuff, like maybe you have face wipes or like smelly sunscreen or something like that, like that's going to be stuff that you're going to want to kind of store with your food because bears might be attracted to that smell. You can make noise when you're traveling, and that just kind of lets the bear know that you're coming, and they'll generally just move out of the way. In my experience, when I've come upon bears, they've always just like looked at me. We've had a moment, and then they just like turn around and run. But you don't necessarily want to surprise them, and you don't want to surprise a mother and her cubs. If you do encounter a black bear, because that's what we have here in Minnesota, it's nice to have kind of a plan because it could happen. It's not likely, but it could happen. You want to stay calm because black bears generally are going to run away. You can talk to it, just tell it how beautiful it is. Thank it for letting you be in its forest. And really you want to make sure that you let the bear have an exit so that it can leave without feeling trapped. You don't want to offer it food because we don't want the bears to associate food with hikers because that's dangerous for everybody. And if it was to come towards you, you can act boldly, make yourself look big. And, you know, I generally don't carry bear spray in Minnesota, but you could bring that if you felt more comfortable with it, as long as you know how to use it. And then you could use it if it approached you. I'll use bear spray out, or I'll carry bear spray out west when it's in grizzly country, but I don't generally worry about it in Minnesota because all of my experiences with black bears have been pretty positive. All right, so speaking of safety on the trail, maybe you're not a man and you want to go hiking by yourself. And a question that I see a lot is it safe? Now, I can only speak to my own experiences on the SHT, but I have not had any experiences that I feel unsafe because I am a woman on the SHT. And again, I can't speak for everybody. However, when I have talked about what I plan to do, either traveling on the SHT or in other travels that I've done, there's always lots of questions about whether I should go alone, whether you should bring a gun, you know, what about this, that, and the other. And that can be really hard to maintain your confidence. So if you are also not a man and you want to go out hiking alone, know that you can do so safely. I mean, there's always going to be some risk when you do things, but that's going to be the case whether you are in a city or whether you're out on the trail. So when you are on the trail, you're going to want to make sure you're trusting your gut. Like if something doesn't feel right, then it's probably not. You might choose what information to share. So you might not tell somebody where you plan to camp if you're not feeling good about the situation. And again, we have to remember that harassment and stuff is not limited to like our outdoor spaces. So if we kind of work on this systemic problem, then we probably won't have to worry about it so much in the outdoor community either. And of course, there is safety in numbers, and that goes for all hikers, regardless of gender identity. But if you're kind of just making sure to trust your gut and to feel like confident with these things, it is possible to go alone on the trail and still feel okay. All right, so this kind of is going into making sure that we are helping to make all of our trail users feel comfortable. So supporting diversity on the trail is really important because there are some different groups out there that are less represented than others. So some groups that are less represented would be like Black and Indigenous and other people of color, LGBT plus people, women. So we want to make sure that we are educating ourselves on the issues, and I've included some of these different links on that follow-up email, and kind of learning about some of the reasons that there is disparities, and some people are more likely to be out on trail than others right now. And as we work to fix that, we want to make sure that we're supporting some different businesses that have diversity in their mission statements. We're supporting organizations that promote diversity. And we can also work with our votes, right, and get people in office who are going to promote access. Now, kind of wrapping things up a little bit, the Spear Hiking Trail is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I really have enjoyed what I've learned from myself and how I've been able to build connections with the land and with other hikers and with my community itself. So if you feel this way, or if you have other things that you really like about the trail, you might consider getting involved in some way. So like Jaron mentioned, you can become a member, you can donate, and these fees and funds are going to go to help to keep the trail good and to help build more bridges and things like that. If you don't have a lot of extra money on hand, that's fine. There's also opportunities to volunteer in lots of different ways, whether that's doing work on a trail, whether that's volunteering at a tabling event or writing a letter of support or something like that. There's lots of ways that you can be involved that way. And maybe you don't have a lot of money and you don't have any time. That's okay too. You can just practice leave no trace while you're out there and leave the trail better for the next people who come by. So to kind of summarize things up, again, these are our 7 principles of leave no trace. So planning ahead and preparing is kind of that idea of like looking at the maps, preparing yourself, your body, your gear before you get out there. When we're traveling and camping on durable surfaces, we're going to be making sure to stay at those campsites, to stay on the trail, disposing of waste properly, whether that's your own like human waste or whether that's trash that you bring in there. We want to make sure that we're leaving what we find, so we're not chopping down things that are alive to make our campsites any bigger. And we want to make sure that we are minimizing those campfire impacts by using dead and downed trees, putting the fires in the campfire rings, and then making sure that the fires are out when we leave. And then we want to respect wildlife by keeping a clean camp, and making sure that we're keeping track of our pets. And then being considerate of other visitors by doing a lot of those things, by being the one to welcome people into the campsite, being a friendly face on the trail, and helping to support diversity as we go. So that's my spiel. I'm really excited to see some of these different questions that came in. So maybe Jaron, do you want to help with this part?
Yes, absolutely. And first, Anna, I just want to say thank you. And there's been a few comments from attendees saying thanks. So we're so glad that you were able to share this information with so many trail users. And you know, that last slide about summarizing on leave no trace principles, that first step is plan ahead and prepare. And that is what everybody tuning in today is doing right now. So you're already on the path to leave no trace on the Superior Hiking Trail. We just had a couple questions come in, which we can answer in order. It looks like some have come in through the question and answer page, so that's fine. We can go ahead and answer them there. An anonymous user just said, any recommendations for some sections of the trail that would be especially scenic for a day hike? Lake views, pretty bridges in the woods, etc.
So that is so hard because I feel like there's so many really beautiful sections of trail. Jaron, do you have any? I have some in mind, but do you have any that you wanted to recommend?
You know, it's totally subjective, and I found that every section has something that is worth the hike, worth the time out in the woods. I live in Duluth, and so I'm often on the SHT in Duluth. For example, the section that goes from Bagley Nature Area on the UMD campus through Hartley and then up to Martin Road. I think it's a 3.1 mile section through Hartley. It's beautiful, and you forget that you're inside the city of Duluth. But of course, I've experienced quite a bit up the shore as well. And you know, the guidebook explains more to help you find out what you're going to be seeing along that section. I hesitate to send people to a specific spot because there's really something good everywhere you go. I'd say give it a shot and see what you find out there.
Yeah, and it's funny that you should mention that particular section of trail because between yesterday and today, I did most of that section. So I think that people really should check out some of the Duluth sections of trail because I think a lot of times people like blast right up the shore and they totally miss some of the really cool sections. Like even between Duluth and Jay Cook are some of my favorite sections of the trail. I also, sometimes I like to park at some of those trailheads that don't have anybody at them and then just see what's there. And I'm always just surprised by like how beautiful everything is. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I feel like each section just has some really cool spots.
I absolutely agree. There's a couple more questions here that have come in. Here's a really good one that I want to raise here from Don Hart. And preferred reporting if you find trouble on the trail. And I think this is something, there's a couple different ways of thinking about this. First, if there's ever an emergency or if there's a law enforcement response that's necessary, 911 is always the best way to go. And because there's not cell service all over on the Superior Hiking Trail, it's worth mentioning that sometimes a 911 phone call will get out. Even when it doesn't look like you might have cell service. The providers prioritize 911 and emergency calls. Same goes with text messages. Sometimes those get through. I'm not sure that we have a text to 911 system along the trail. I don't think so, but you can get a number for search and rescue and even have a personal contact who knows you're out on the trail that you can check in with if for some reason a phone call is not getting through. And then if you see damage on the trail, there's a down tree, any other incidents, poor behavior, things that don't require 911 or an immediate response, we do have a form on our website, the trail incident report that you can find right on superiorhiking.org to be able to let us know of what you found out there. So I know I took that question, but I just wanted to bring that up because it's super important for everybody and make sure that you know what to expect if you do encounter some problems out on the trail. Okay, back to more fun questions. Bailey asked, how long did it take for you to thru hike? And did you travel northbound or southbound? That's a great question.
Yeah, so when I thru hiked, the trail was a little bit shorter, so it's a little bit longer now. But I thru hiked from Jay Cook up to Canada, and it took me 17 days. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to most people because it hurt pretty bad some of the time. But yeah, it was a really lovely experience. So yeah, I went northbound.
And kind of a follow-up question. Do you think you can speak to the benefits or drawbacks for hiking northbound or southbound? Is there a preferred direction?
For me, like I just wanted to be like, I'm hiking to Canada, that was really the only reason that I decided to go northbound. I think that coming southbound would be nice. I did have like my mom and stepdad pick me up on the northern side. So like logistically that can be more challenging because I had to let them know like the last time I had cell service, like when they should expect me. Versus like if you're hiking southbound, it can be a little bit easier to just get dropped off up north and then get picked up down here where there's more civilization. Duluth was really, really challenging. So I think that it's actually a pretty hard section. So having some hiking legs before you hit Duluth would probably be a good thing too. But I was all full of adrenaline, so that helped me get through. So really, I mean, it's kind of a non-answer too. I think if you're gonna go do it, I think it's gonna just be awesome whether you go northbound or southbound. There's a lot of either way, so.
The one recommendation that I'd give, especially for someone on their first trip, is that if you decide that you need to get off the trail and you have started at the northern terminus, it may be a lot harder to get off of the trail. There's not cell service that's reliable, fewer people going past, to get a ride if there's an emergency. Obviously there is search and rescue, but it can be more advantageous if you're worried to start on the southern end where there's more resources and cell service. But
that makes a lot of sense.
There are a lot of other logistics to consider too. There's a lot of work to do to get ready for a thru hike, of course. Here's a good question from Monica. Can we use toilet paper when using the campground latrines?
Yeah, you can use toilet paper.
Yes, the latrines, the only things that go in them are toilet paper and the things that you should be leaving in latrines, human waste. Let's see, another anonymous question. Do you have any recommendations for the best parts of the trail for a short backpacking trip during the summer?
So again, this kind of goes to my previous thing where every time I go on a different section, I'm like, this section is great. One thing you might consider is avoiding like the Bean and Bear Lake section for overnights, just because that area is really, really used. So what you could consider is even like parking like near there and hiking south instead, because that section is really beautiful. So, maybe looking and avoiding some of the areas that are really more crowded, because I went there last fall when that area was really, really busy, and I saw 2 people when I went south. So just kind of that idea of spreading out the love a little bit, because like Bean and Bear Lake is beautiful, but you don't necessarily need to camp there to see it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I've gone on summer camping trips in a few different places, and I haven't found one that was not enjoyable. You really can't go wrong, but I think that's great advice to avoid some of the most popular sections. Bean and Bear Lakes is a great example. Around the state parks tend to be where a lot of people come in and use the trail and go on a shorter weekend backpacking trip. So in general, further north and away from some of the state parks, you'll usually run into fewer folks. On a similar line here, Dave asked, how crowded is the trail during peak leaf change season?
I mean, I think being in Bear Lake gets pretty busy, but I went there, like, again, I parked at that same spot and like hike south or just like go one or two trailheads down and you won't see nearly as many people. So maybe
Yeah.
I'm giving away all my secrets now, but I really want people to have a positive experience. And I think that you still will, even if it's busy, especially if we're practicing leave no trace for everybody else. But in general, people get kind of spread out along the trail. It's just certain areas that get kind of a little bit more busy than others.
Yeah, I think the trailheads can fill up, especially during fall leaf color change season. But I've never encountered a spot where the trail itself was super busy.
Yeah.
So it's always good to spread out, and especially in the time of COVID, just try to keep your distance on the trail. And if you come to a full trailhead, keep going to the next one, or have a backup plan in place so we don't overcrowd at trailheads.
But yeah, usually like once you're on the trail itself, it's not too crazy, even in like the city of Duluth and some of those areas.
Yep. We had a couple questions about protecting food from bears. Do we need a bear container for the SHT?
No, you don't need a bear container for the SHT. A lot of people will hang their food. And I see that there's a question about whether it's safe to cook at the campsites or not. In general, you're fine cooking at the campsites because this is black bears. When I'm out west in grizzly country, we do things a little bit differently. But let's see, I'm just looking at the questions here. So you don't need a bear canister necessarily. If you want to use one, that's great. It's a really easy way to keep critters out of your food. But
I'll add that the association recently installed bear poles at 3 of our campsites. I think Onion River, I believe West Lake Agnes, don't quote me. I know they were out this fall installing a couple of them, kind of as a test run to see how it goes. So if you are at a campsite that has one of those poles, give it a shot and let us know, because it's something that we may be able to implement at more of our campsites.
Yeah, that's great.
Here's another question in the chat from Susan. Is the shuttle a reliable way to get on and off the trail?
From what I hear, it works pretty well. I haven't myself used it very much. I know they were doing things a little bit differently this year because of COVID. But I think in general that they get a lot of people using them. So I don't know, Jaron, have you?
Yeah, I know this last year was a bit of an anomaly because of COVID, that usually the Superior Shuttle Service has, which is not run by the SHT, it's a private business, but it serves the trailheads for the SHT. And typically they have a scheduled route every day that they're operating, and they do customized pickups. Well, last year it was all custom pickups. So what we always recommend if you're going to use that service, or Harriet Quarles Transportation is another recommended service on the trail. There are a few others. So if you're going to do that, we always recommend that you park your car, catch the shuttle to start your trip, and then hike back to your vehicle so that you don't have to worry about catching a scheduled shuttle, or if things change during your hike and you're going to be later or earlier and you don't have cell service, you save yourself a lot of logistics trouble by hiking back to your vehicle. I've rarely heard of anybody having a problem with the shuttles once they've been scheduled. So I would say that they're all recommended and reliable. Any tips for resupplying while hiking? I'm not sure if you resupplied or carried most of yours.
So I sent myself some packages. I sent a package to Beaver Bay and I sent a package to Grand Marais. But I also like went to the co-op in Grand Marais and bought myself some tasty vegetables and stuff too. So like as far as resupplying goes, some of the options that people have in general is to either like mail yourself packages to the post office and then you can just pick it up with an ID. Otherwise, you can go to a grocery store and just buy whatever it is that you want. Kind of like my picture that I showed of my friend and I out west. So you can have that as an option too. And I think in the guidebook it says I think it says some of the different ways that you can resupply in some of the different towns along the trail. I just
Yeah.
the Bay and Grand Marais because they were a little bit closer in. So I just hiked like into town from the trail. But people use other trails or other towns all the time.
Yep, there's a couple documents on our through hiking page under the Plan Your Adventure tab on superiorhiking.org that include a little bit more of that resupply information. There's also a guidebook through hiking the Superior Hiking Trail published by Annie Nelson that details a lot of those options and other grocery stores and lodges and other ways to support yourself while you're out there on a long distance hike. David asks, I want to touch on the unique weather in the area. Lake Superior creates some unique weather that can have some fun surprises as he's experienced in his time in the Boundary Waters.
Yeah, that's true. There can be some unique weather. Sometimes it can be fairly cool in the summer. So even if it's hot during the day, sometimes it's nice to have like a fleece or something to have at night. Yeah, I guess I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have other things to add, Jaron?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be prepared for a wide variety of weather. And especially if you're on a longer distance hike, it can totally change from the forecast before your trip starts.
Mhm.
The lake can bring in storms and it can defeat storms pretty powerfully. But we get a range, obviously in the winter, it can get very, very cold. And so you have to be prepared for winter conditions. But snow can happen all the way into May here. Heavy rains can happen throughout the summer and fall at any time. We do have lightning storms. So it's always important to be prepared for that. And, we get heat and humidity during the summer as well. That can be pretty intense. I'd say the spring and the fall is where you're probably going to see the most variability between temperatures. So, planning ahead, making sure you have gear for colder weather, gear for warmer weather. That's the best way to avoid problems when you're out there on the trail, and be ready for a wide variety. I know there was also a question vaguely related to weather conditions is bugs. And
Oh, yeah.
Marianne had mentioned that in June it was pretty rough in the Boundary Waters due to mosquitoes. She was asking the least buggy time of the year besides winter for the SHT.
I would say fall is a really lovely time on the SHT because the bugs have kind of dropped off. In my experience, you'll see more of the black flies and mosquitoes and stuff by the end of May into June. And then in like pockets, especially in August. But then kind of by September, it's a little bit more like chilled out. But I also find a lot of times that if you're hiking, it's generally okay. It's just like you might want to bring a bug net or something for at camp during those times.
Yeah. Yeah. Mosquitoes and black flies can be a real nuisance. And I think ticks are a little bit more concerning given that tick-borne illnesses here in Minnesota are real. There's Lyme's disease and others. And so I always recommend folks do a thorough tick check. And they can be out even into the fall. It's always good to do some of the basics like tucking your pants into your socks to try to avoid ticks from being able to even access your skin. I know some trail users prefer to use bug spray or other chemicals pesticides to avoid ticks. It really is up to individuals to decide that, but just doing a check to make sure that you don't have a tick bite on you. And there's plenty of resources online for how to deal with tick bites if you do get one, but it's worth taking the time to check on a daily basis during tick season. Let's see. It's a good question from Beverly. Is there any guide for sections of trail that may not be so rocky for seniors? I'm 80. Well, thanks for being here, Beverly, and being newly interested in the trail. We're glad to have you with us.
I don't think that there's any published guide necessarily. I did write a blog a while back about some areas that are a little bit more accessible. But some of those hikes are still like fairly steep. I know there's some sections kind of between Duluth and Two Harbors that are a little bit less less rocky. Like there's still some roots and things in them, but those would maybe some spots to check out. Let's see, Jaron, do you have any other spots that you've been to recently that are a little bit more?
Yeah, one that I would recommend, Beverly, and others who are looking for this, is the route to Pincushion Mountain from the Pincushion Mountain Trailhead up in Grand Marais. And the reason I recommend it is last year we completed a reroute project there. So that entire section of trail, it's 2.5, almost 3 miles of trail that is brand new and machine built for the first time on the SHT. And so it features boardwalks and really smooth, even tread compared to the rest of the trail that was built quite a while ago. So that may be a nice place to go. Of course, at the end to get up to the Pincushion Mountain overlook, there's kind of a climb on a big rock face. So that may be a challenge, but it's still a beautiful section of trail, even if you don't go up to that overlook. Duluth to Two Harbors, as Anna mentioned, is great. And then there are some sections in Duluth too that may be more optimal. Of course, like the Duluth Lake Walk is a part of the SHT, but that may not be what you're looking for. That's a paved section. So it's, where the trail overlaps with a ski trail or the North Shore State Trail, those tend to be more even and flat.
Yeah, and I really like, speaking of Duluth, like the area between, it's like 24th Avenue West, right off of Highway 53 and Enger Tower. It's still quite a climb, but it's kind of a nice section of trail that's a little bit less rooty and rocky than some. So that's a nice spot. And the Pincushion Mountain Trailhead, like even that parking lot is just beautiful. So checking out that section is a great idea too. I forgot that there was a reroute on that, so that's exciting.
Yeah. Here's another good question. How much water should an average backpacker carry per day?
So this really depends on how hot it is and how, like which section of trail you're on, and like how much weight you're carrying too. So one thing that is really wonderful with the SHT is that there is lots of little streams and things that you can fill up with on the SHT. So like I generally don't find myself carrying more than a liter or two, with a way to also treat water along the way. Sometimes you can see trip reports or conditions about whether a section of the trail is pretty dry in a season, and then you might want to consider bringing more. But you don't need to carry, like if you have some way of treating water, you don't necessarily need to carry like gallons of water with you, because there are streams and things that you could fill up with on the way. That's what I do anyway. So.
Yep, I tend to carry more water than I need to, but I also like the challenge of extra weight in my pack.
Yeah, on my through hike, I carried more water than I needed to because I just didn't want to stop that much to fill up. But after having more experience out west when it's really dry, I can really appreciate the water that we have here in Minnesota. So.
And as far as planning your water stops, as Anna mentioned, you're going to see it all over the place, but you can find that information in the guidebook and in the data book, and you can see water sources in the Trail Atlas maps. Almost every SHTA campsite has a water source nearby. That's why they've been located where they are. And the few that do not are indicated in those resources too. So usually you can rely, if you come across a sign for a campsite, there's probably water nearby. Let's see, we've still got a lot of questions here, so we'll try and pick a couple more, and then we can follow up with folks for any questions that we did not get to. Here's a question. We'll see if you have an answer for it from Anonymous. Anonymous, what do you recommend to do in the event that you run into a moose?
I personally have not run into a moose, which I am kind of glad about, and I think it would be kind of cool to see them. But I think what the recommended thing to do is, like, if it's in your way and or if it's looking like it's going to charge you, is to make sure that you have some sort of tree or something between you and the moose and to kind of back away and get out of there. because like an angry moose is not something that you want to have coming after you. Again, I don't have any personal experience with seeing moose. I have seen some of their scat sometimes, but it's not in Minnesota. I have seen moose in other areas, and they always just ignored me. So I don't know. Yeah, Jaron, have you heard anything else other than just making sure that you are little and behind a tree?
I think our anonymous question asker caught us here, that we have a little bit more planning and preparing to do in case we do encounter moose, because I don't know the answer either.
Yeah,
I'm sure that there are answers online
that's
though.
what I have read, is just like making sure that you have something between you and the moose, and that you can kind of back away with that in there so that maybe they don't see you.
There were two questions about the Duluth section here that are kind of related. How do you navigate the Duluth section with limited campsites? And then from Janet, why is the Duluth section so difficult? She's planning to hike south to north because she thought it was easier. Do you want to speak to that, Anna?
Sure. Well, now, so there's some different camping options in Duluth. Usually, I mean, and it might change a little bit because of COVID, but hopefully by this next season, that won't be as much of an issue. You can camp at Spirit Mountain. There's a campground there, and then Bagley has a campground too. I have helped hikers out who have been staying at some local hotels, so that can be an option too if you want to like leave something in a hotel room, slack pack, or like hike without all your stuff to a different area and then get a ride back to the hotel. I met some hikers doing that last year. And I think that some people use the campground kind of down by Chambers Grove too, for that section. So those are some of the different things that you can do to get through Duluth. And I guess what is hard about Duluth is that there's a lot of elevation. Like you kind of go up and down the hill, because you end up like up on top of the hill, then you're down at the lake, and then you're like back up on top of the hill again. So that can be pretty challenging. And a lot of it is on trail, which is really wonderful. But some of that trail is pretty rugged too. So yeah, there is camping options now, which is kind of nice, but they're not free. You have to kind of pay for them and plan ahead on that.
Yeah, it does make it a bit of a challenge for long distance through hikers. If you're able to or willing to, you can embrace the fact that you're in an urban area and stay at a lodge or a hotel for a night and get that shower and clean your supplies and enjoy, takeout food or something while you're in the area. Because for the most part, you're not going to experience quite the same further up the shore. There are lodges up the shore too, if you are looking for a night where you can camp, or where you can stay at a lodge and not camp along your trip. I know someone else had asked a similar question, so that applies to more than just Duluth.
Yeah.
Let's go two more questions here. Peter asked, is solid fuel good for cooking? And maybe we can take just a quick moment to talk about cooking food at campsites on the trail.
Yeah, so you can use solid fuel to cook your food if you want. That might be another thing that you could experiment with, like while you're at home still, just to see how it works or see how much of the fuel that you need. In my experience, like when I thru hiked, I used an alcohol stove that I made out of a pop can. And so that was kind of fun to play around with. A lot of the times now I'll use like a canister stove where you can just like screw the stove into the fuel, and that cooks things a lot faster. But really there's not like one way that works the best. You kind of just have to figure out what works best for you and for the conditions that you're in. So if you wanted to use a hard fuel tablet that you burn, then that's fine.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options on the market right now, and most of them work just fine. Of course, wind and wet weather and other conditions can dictate. We definitely recommend using a stove versus a campfire for cooking, because at some points during the season, there could be a temporary ban on fires as well, and you don't want to get caught in that. Or it's usually not a problem to find dead down dry wood at campsites either, but if you're relying on that for cooking, that could be a bit tricky. So it's always good to have something to cook, or to cook your food, heat your water, whatever you're going to use out there, unless you're going entirely without cooking on the trail, which is an option too. Okay, here's a two-part question from Dawn, and I like where these are going. She asks about trail angels. Are there any chapters for support? And then volunteer project opportunities, how to best get involved.
So getting involved with volunteer stuff, you can talk to Jaron. No, I'm just kidding. um, but going and contacting the SHT and going on the website for that. They have a really cool volunteer portal that just got launched recently. So you can kind of see the different volunteer opportunities, and it's almost like you can put them in your cart to sign up for them. So that can be a really, that's a really just cool way to get involved. And what was the other part of that question, Jaron?
Asking about trail angels, and it's kind of a trick question.
A trick question. In what way?
Well, she was asking if there are any chapters for support, and to answer that, we do not have chapters out on the trail. I think in my experience and what I've seen, trail angels are folks that you might encounter on the trail who are able to provide some help or support or a snack or a beverage or something, but it typically happens organically out on the trail. There's not a great system in place to communicate between trail users. I mean, there are forums online. There's Reddit forum. There's a Facebook group about the SHT where some people do connect, but there's no formalized system for trail angels. Like maybe it's a little different on some of the other trails in the country. So rely on trail magic to arrive organically when you're out there. Okay, so there are a few more questions that I will follow up with offline with folks and that were sent in by email. So if we missed you, we will try and answer your question that way. And I think Anna mentioned this during her presentation that there will be an email tomorrow that has a link to a document with a bunch of resources related to planning your trip on the SHT and more broadly too. Anna, do you want to say anything else about that document?
Yeah, so when I was looking at just the different things that it's good for people to know who want to come on the SHT, I was like, oh man, there's so many cool things out there, but there's only so much that you can cover in like an hour, right? So I and Jaron kind of went through and found some more additional resources. So some of the things that I just barely touched on, like some of the gear stuff and things, there's some additional resources on there for all of that stuff. So if you're like, you didn't answer all my questions, I have so many more, you can kind of start with some of those resources, and that might help answer some of those questions we didn't get to.
And of course, you are welcome to contact us at the SHTA. You can reach us at info@superiorhiking.org. Go to our website, superiorhiking.org, find a lot of the information there. Shoot us an email through the contact us page too. There are a lot of resources out there to help you get started. And that is part of what we do, is to try and get you out on the trail for an enjoyable, safe experience on the SHT. So with that, I want to thank Anna. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been fantastic. A little over an hour here. Thank you so much for your time, Anna, and for everybody at home watching. We're so glad to have you with us. I will give one more quick plug, if you have not already done so, to pop over to our website and consider making a gift, becoming a member of the Superior Hiking Trail Association, or learning more about volunteerism. It really takes all of our trail users contributing for us to be able to continue to maintain this joyous resource. So with that, I will let everybody go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.